Family reunions had always left a bitter aftertaste in my mouth, like stale wine poured into a cracked glass, tolerated for tradition's sake, but never truly enjoyed. Yet that particular year's gathering felt like stepping into a performance where I was the unwilling villain in a script I never wrote. Everything about the scene was off-kilter, from the moment I pulled into Aunt Marine's gravel driveway in the middle of rural Idaho, where pine trees loomed like silent witnesses, and the evening sun bled red across the sky, as if foreshadowing the emotional carnage waiting inside. I wore a floral dress I found for $10 at a secondhand shop downtown. Soft, faded, imperfect, like me, paired with boots that had seen more rainy sidewalks and cold bus stops than anyone at that reunion could imagine. And in my pocket, I carried nothing but the shattered remnants of optimism I hadn't yet learned to bury. My name is Calla Whitmore. I'm 24, American, sarcastic when I'm scared, and a little too sensitive for a family that treats feelings like clutter. And as the middle child, I'd always been the blurry one, between Brent, the tech bro with a Tesla and a startup, and Haley, the golden girl who could do no wrong with a stethoscope and an Instagram full of hospital selfies. I was the one who didn't follow the script. I left college halfway through sophomore year when I realized my mental health mattered more than a degree I couldn't afford or understand anymore. I took up freelance design work while waitressing tables in diners that smelled like grease and broken dreams, and I learned to live with passion instead of prestige, something my family interpreted as failure. I knew walking into Aunt Maureen's house that I'd be treated like an afterthought, but I hadn't expected to be publicly exiled from their love with a single sentence, carved into memory like a scar I'd spend years tracing. We all gathered in the backyard, where folding chairs surrounded a fire pit that looked more like a spotlight under that tense, heavy sky. And as everyone laughed over wine and retold the same tired stories, I sat at the edge, like a shadow stitched into the fabric of a scene I no longer belonged to. Dad stood up eventually, bourbon in hand, red-faced from both alcohol and the inflated sense of authority he wrapped himself in like a cloak, and launched into one of his infamous reunion toasts, the kind that dripped with backhanded praise and competitive rankings disguised as familial pride. And we all sat there frozen, bracing ourselves like people who'd survived too many storms, but still hoped the lightning wouldn't strike this time. To Brent, he began, slurring slightly, for building his empire from scratch, making us all proud. Everyone clapped. Brent smirked, adjusted his watch like it was a crown. To Haley, Dad continued, his voice practically trembling with pride, for being the first doctor in the family, a real angel in scrubs. More clapping, louder this time, and Haley beamed with practiced humility. Then the room fell still as he turned to me, glass raised, eyes locked on mine like a sniper about to pull the trigger. "I'm proud of all my children," he said, pausing long enough for my heart to race with naive hope. And then came the line that shattered the fragile bridge between us forever. "Except her, the loser," just like that. No wink, no laughter, no "just kidding," just cold, deliberate dismissal, wrapped in a smirk that told everyone I wasn't just the black sheep. I was roadkill. The silence that followed was almost louder than the insult. A few cousins laughed awkwardly, unsure of whether it was a joke. A few looked down at their plates, choosing cowardice over decency. My mother, the woman who once rocked me through nightmares and braided my hair before art shows, didn't even blink. She just sipped her wine, eyes glazed, like the fire had hypnotized her into indifference. I felt every organ inside me clench with a storm of shame, rage, humiliation, and grief. My skin burned, but I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I stood up slowly, the chair scraping behind me like nails down a chalkboard of expectations, and I turned away from the circle of warmth that had become a stage for my emotional execution. I walked through the dark yard, past the lit torches and the laughter that resumed as if nothing happened, my feet steady, but my heart cracked wide open. No one followed me. Not my dad, not Brent, not Haley, not even my mother. I slipped through the side gate and disappeared into the street. The night air, sharp in my lungs like it too, had betrayed me. And in that moment, in that breathless silence, where the moon became my only witness, I realized something fundamental. I had just been buried alive in my family's version of reality. But instead of mourning, I would rise. That night, I died in their eyes. But something else was born in me. A fire, a purpose, a promise to return, not as the girl they broke, but as the woman they would never be able to ignore again. They called me a loser, but they had no idea I was about to win on a scale they couldn't even comprehend. I walked away from that backyard fire as if I were shedding a skin, like the flame behind me had cremated the version of myself they rejected, and what remained was raw, unfinished, and hungry, not for their love, not anymore, but for something deeper, colder, sharper, vindication. I didn't disappear from the world, but I vanished completely from their reality, became a ghost threaded through their family group chat by my absence alone, a name never spoken unless it was behind gritted teeth or suffocated by regret they didn't know how to admit. I packed my life into a single duffel bag the next morning, my thrifted dress still folded with the sting of humiliation clinging to its seams, and boarded a Greyhound with exactly $117, a secondhand laptop, and a rage that pulsed like electricity in my blood. Portland greeted me like a blank canvas, soaked in gray rain and city noise, and for the first few nights, I slept on the living room floor of a Craigslist roommate who barely acknowledged me. My back ached. My stomach gnawed from hunger. I stretched peanut butter across slices of white bread, thinner than my patience, and survived on free Wi-Fi, coffee shop leftovers, and the kind of stubbornness only someone who's been shamed by their own blood can summon. I took the small jobs no one wanted. Cringy poster designs for indie poetry nights, outdated logos for Etsy shops run by anxious moms, awkward flyer mock-ups for overpriced candle boutiques. Because each one gave me $5, $10, something to keep me afloat long enough to keep creating. I poured the pain into my art, bold strokes, minimalist tension, harsh contrasts, soulful lines that whispered defiance even when I couldn't say it aloud. And quietly, methodically, I started uploading digital design packs to obscure marketplaces under a moniker I scribbled on a napkin during a panic attack, Whitmark Studio, a play on my last name and the mark I intended to leave behind, the kind that branded memory. I had no audience, no marketing, no connections, but I had fire. And then it happened. First slowly, then like a tidal wave. One of my brush packs, raw and clean and full of ache, went viral among indie designers on TikTok. Comments poured in. Sales doubled overnight. People didn't just buy the files. They felt them. They felt me without knowing it. Another pack took off. Then another. My inbox filled with collaboration requests, brand work, thank you notes from strangers, saying my work inspired their projects, their walls, their healing. I stopped sleeping on floors. I moved into a tiny studio with a creaky fire escape and mismatched tile, where I painted at 3 a.m. while sipping chamomile tea and playing Old Florence, plus the machine tracks. I opened my own digital storefront. Then I built my site. Then came the emails from startups. Would you be open to rebranding us? Do you do full identity packages? We love the emotion in your line work. One small project turned into a larger one with funding. I negotiated hard, not just for the money, but for the respect they never gave me. I signed NDAs. I led branding campaigns. I watched their faces light up in Zoom meetings, clueless that the woman behind Whitmark was the same girl they might have mocked at a family reunion years ago. By 25, I was self-employed, generating 6 figures a year, and hiring 2 assistants to help me manage it all. But despite the luxury of success, the loft with exposed brick, the midnight ramen bowls with jazz playing through Bluetooth speakers, the feeling of designing not just for clients, but for myself, I never changed my number. Not because I wanted reconciliation, because I wanted evidence. Every ping that lit up my phone with a familiar name, Dad, Brent, Haley, became a digital receipt of their slow realization that I had vanished from their grasp. The texts came sporadically at first. Hey, just wanted to see how you're doing. Then, Mom misses you. And later, hope you're well. Saw someone who looked like you downtown. The holidays hit harder. Selfies of family dinners I was no longer in. Messages that smelled of guilt and last-minute attempts to feel better about themselves, always timed perfectly to ruin my peace. I never answered. I never blocked them. I archived every single message into a folder I labeled Prove It, a private gallery of performative guilt I would one day exhibit. And with each message, instead of breaking down, I created harder, cleaner, bolder designs. Each curve and edge, like a silent scream, turned into beauty. I was no longer creating to survive. I was creating to rewrite the narrative they stapled to my name. I didn't want their love anymore. I wanted something more devastating. For them to realize I became extraordinary without them. I wanted to return, not as a daughter crawling back for scraps of affection, but as a storm they couldn't explain. A legend they would have to tell people they once knew, but never truly saw. They thought they'd erased me, that my exit into the night was the end of my chapter. But what they never realized was that I wasn't erasing myself. I was rewriting everything, in fonts, in color palettes, in bold launch emails that landed in the inboxes of companies they invested in, unknowingly applauding the woman they once called a loser. And I knew, with a conviction that hummed in my bones like static before lightning, I would return one day, not with an apology or a heart open for wounds, but with a presence so undeniable they would choke on every cruel word they ever spoke over me. That day would come, not out of revenge alone, but justice. And when it did, they wouldn't even recognize the girl they buried. They'd see a woman reborn in fire, and they'd wish I had stayed gone. 3 long years had passed since I severed every tie to that toxic family, since I disappeared from their lives like a shadow retreating into the night, leaving behind the pain, the judgment, and the bitter words that had echoed in my ears far too long. I had built a life in the quiet corners of Portland, surrounded by creativity and the hum of my own ambition, forging a new identity, piece by piece, brick by brick. Then, one afternoon, a message came from Aunt Maureen, the woman who had hosted the reunion that had shattered me, an invitation to come back. The words on the screen seemed almost surreal, almost cruel, an invitation to another reunion, at the same house, the same backyard where my father had publicly branded me a failure. Healing was the promise, a chance for the family to come together and mend what had been torn apart. They said Dad had changed, that everyone missed me, that the past could be rewritten. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours, my mind a tumult of memories and raw emotion. Could I really face them again? Could I show them the woman I'd become? Not the broken girl they cast aside, but the woman who had risen from the ashes of their rejection. The battle inside me raged between the pain they caused and the fire I'd nurtured in silence, a fire that now burned brighter than ever. With trembling fingers, I typed the two words that would change everything. I'll come. The day I arrived, I was not the Calla Whitmore who had left years ago, uncertain and hurting. I was Wit, a name I'd chosen to mark my rebirth, my new identity, and my hard-fought success. I pulled up to Aunt Marine's house in a leased Tesla, the sleek black car an unspoken declaration of the life I had built without their help or approval. My dress was elegant and commanding, a tailored black silhouette that spoke of confidence and control. Around my neck was the latest limited edition scarf from my brand, Whitmark Studio. A bold design, inspired by that night, they called me a loser, transformed into a symbol of strength and resilience. As I stepped into that backyard, I could feel the atmosphere shift immediately. Brent's wife gasped, her wine glass slipping from her fingers and shattering on the stone beneath us. A sharp, shocking sound that broke the illusion of normalcy. Haley's voice was barely audible as she whispered my name, Calla, as if I were a ghost from their collective guilt. Dad rose slowly, his eyes narrowing in disbelief and something like fury. Well, the prodigal artist returns, he sneered, trying to mask his vulnerability with sarcasm. But I didn't flinch. I looked him square in the eye, voice steady and cool. I go by Wit now. You can call me CEO. The weight of those words hung heavy, silencing the crowd instantly. My mother, seated near the fire pit, stood uncertainly, her hands trembling, caught between relief and the shock of seeing me transformed. Brent stepped forward, attempting to pull me into a hug, his smile brittle and uncertain, trying to reclaim a sister he no longer recognized. Haley's voice chimed in, sweet but hollow. Calla, you look amazing. But I wasn't there for their praise or their attempts at reconciliation. I was there for the fire, the same fire they had tried to extinguish with their cruelty years ago. That fire was mine now, and it blazed quietly beneath my calm exterior, ready to ignite the truth they tried to hide. The night unfolded like a slow-burning fuse. The conversations initially polite, but charged with an undercurrent of tension and unsaid words. I spoke calmly, but my words were sharp and precise, cutting through their polished smiles and forced niceties. I told them about the nights I spent alone, designing in dimly lit rooms, creating art that spoke to strangers and clients who believed in me, people who didn't know the girl they called a failure. I shared the pride I'd built from scratch, the brands I'd created, the clients who trusted me without a second thought. I revealed the truth behind the image of success they flaunted, a truth that was messy, hard-won, and utterly mine. Dad tried to interrupt, his voice rising in frustration, but I silenced him with a look that told him I was no longer a child, to be controlled or dismissed. Brent shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet my gaze, while Haley's mask slipped, revealing jealousy and bitterness beneath her sweet exterior. My mother's eyes filled with tears. Not of forgiveness, not yet, but of recognition, seeing me for the woman I had become despite them all. The fire pit flickered, casting dancing shadows over our faces, mirroring the flicker of emotions that ignited in that backyard: anger, regret, pride, and pain. I laid bare the years of neglect and doubt, the years of fighting to prove my worth to people who never wanted to see it. I was not their failure. I was the phoenix they tried to bury, and I had risen, stronger and more radiant than ever. As the night wore on, the weight of unspoken truths settled heavily over the reunion. Some shifted uneasily in their seats. Others looked away, unable to face the woman who had shattered their comfortable narrative. When the evening finally came to an end, I left with my head held high, leaving behind a silence louder than any applause. I had reclaimed my story and rewritten the script. The woman who walked away was no longer the girl they had rejected. I was Wit, CEO, artist, survivor. And the message I left in that backyard was clear. You can try to bury me in your judgments and insults, but I will always rise. Unstoppable, unbreakable, and undeniably me. Dinner that night was a stage where every smile hid a knife. Every word was coated with venom, and every glance held a challenge. But I was no longer the frightened girl from years before. Instead, I sat poised, like a queen surveying the court that had once mocked her. And as the plates clinked and glasses were refilled, my father launched into his usual routine, cracking jokes with a forced joviality that barely masked the tension, nodding his jaw and twisting his throat. It was a pitiful show, an attempt to erase the elephant in the room, but I was immune to his facade, watching him carefully as he joked about things none of us really found funny, his eyes flickering nervously whenever they caught mine, a silent plea for reconciliation that he would never earn. Brent, always desperate to prove his worth, spoke incessantly about a new app his company was launching, his words brimming with empty promises and hype, a desperate bid to reclaim the spotlight and remind everyone he was the golden boy. But the room hummed with skepticism. No one really believing the game changer he boasted about. And I found amusement in his struggle to maintain control. Haley, the shining med student with her pristine badge glinting under the lights, paraded it like a medal, a symbol of her moral high ground and the supposed measure of her superiority. Her smile sharp, eyes bright with a mix of pride and judgment, as if her academic success gave her license to look down on me. Yet I remained still, calm, a polite smile masking the storm inside. For I held a secret none of them could touch, truth carved in stone, success built on sweat and pain, and receipts that would burn their facades to ash. Then dessert arrived, a quiet lull in the chaos, and Aunt Maureen, ever the cautious peacemaker, asked in her usual soft tone, "So, Calla, what do you do these days?" The question hanging in the air, like a challenge and an invitation all at once, and I leaned back with a slow, deliberate smile, savoring the moment before I answered, "You ever heard of Wit Mark Studio?" My voice calm, resonant, carrying the weight of years and the promise of my resurrection. Silence fell like a heavy curtain. Brent's jaw tightened, his eyes flashing, with something between shock and denial. Haley blinked rapidly, the smugness draining from her expression. Dad's face twisted in confusion and disbelief, his mouth opening, then closing, as if trying to form words, but failing. A cousin gasped audibly, eyes wide as she murmured, "You designed Forever Edge Corp?" And I nodded, letting their astonishment swell. "And Nova Health," I continued, "and Axis Play." My voice steady and clear. My work decorates over 60 corporate offices and features in 2 national ad campaigns. And then, with biting irony, I added, "But yeah, I'm just the loser, right?" The room thick with tension as my words struck home. Dad's complexion drained. The confident veneer cracked as he muttered, "Calla, I didn't mean it." But I cut him off, my tone icy. "No, you meant it. Every cruel word. In front of all of them. The memory fresh and raw as a wound reopened. I carried that humiliation like a stone in my chest for years," I admitted, voice steady but edged with pain. But that stone didn't crush me. It built the foundation of my empire. And I watched as his eyes flickered, no longer able to hide the shame. Brent tried desperately to shift the topic, his voice rising in an awkward attempt to regain control. But I wasn't finished, and from my bag, I withdrew a thick stack of printed screenshots, laid them out before their stunned eyes. Every ignored text message, every family photo where I was conspicuously absent, every email that quietly erased my existence. "You erased me," I said softly but firmly. "But I archived everything. Every time you thought I wasn't watching, I was." The proof in black and white, shaking their comfortable illusions. "You taught me a hard lesson about family," I confessed. "It's not the ones who applaud your success. It's the ones who don't bury you when you fall." And their faces flickered with guilt and regret as my words hit home. Standing tall, I let my eyes roam the room, drinking in their shocked expressions, the tight jaws, the averted gazes, and then I whispered, "I didn't come here for forgiveness." My voice dropping so low it was almost a secret. "I came to show you what you lost." And silence swallowed the space, thick and suffocating. That night, I flipped the narrative, turning the tables on the family that had tried to write me off as a failure, reclaiming my dignity and control in a way that left no doubt. The girl they dismissed was now the woman who stood taller than all of them, empowered by truth in unshakable success. The fire that once burned me was now the flame that illuminated the darkness of their hypocrisy. The very family that scorned me was left to reckon with the woman who refused to be broken, whose voice echoed louder than any insult, whose presence demanded recognition, and who walked away not as the girl they cast aside, but as the force they never saw coming. I stepped away from the dimly lit dining room, the weight of every eye burning into my back, like the flames licking the night air just beyond the sliding glass doors. Outside, the familiar backyard stretched before me, the same rough wooden deck where I had felt the cold sting of my father's words years ago, where the fire pit had become an altar for my disgrace. The night was cool but charged, the crackling bonfire casting shifting shadows across the faces that had once dismissed me, faces that now held an unspoken question, a flicker of something between shock and disbelief. Behind me, footsteps followed hesitantly, hesitant, unsure, but none dared to breach the invisible barrier I'd erected since that night long ago. Then, almost in a whisper, my father's voice cracked the silence, trembling with a mix of regret and fear. "Calla, I just thought you needed tough love." The words hung between us, fragile and brittle like broken glass, begging to be repaired. I turned slowly, meeting his gaze with steady eyes that had learned to see past the surface lies. "No, Dad," I said, my voice low but clear, carrying the weight of years of silent pain and quiet determination. "You needed control. You called me a loser because you feared I wouldn't become someone you could parade, a trophy to showcase your success, someone whose life you could boast about at dinners and board meetings. But what you never understood was that your words would be the very fuel that ignited my fire." I paused, letting the truth sink in as the flames flickered wildly, reflecting the storm within me. I became someone you can't reach, someone you can't control, someone whose worth doesn't need your validation. His mouth opened, words choking on his tongue. Please, just come back home. We can fix this. But I shook my head slowly, a sad smile tugging at my lips. Not for forgiveness, not for reconciliation, but for the moment I had been building toward since I first walked away. Home isn't where you are born, I said quietly, the words sharp and clear. Home is where you are safe, where you are loved, where your worth isn't questioned at every turn. This place, I gestured to the yard, the house, the memories. This place burned that bridge years ago. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone by the fire, the flickering light dancing across his face, revealing the cracks in his armor that I'd never seen before. The night air wrapped around me like a cloak as I reached my car, each step heavy with the finality of what was to come. That night, I took one last step in the war I'd fought silently for years. I poured my story into words, raw and unfiltered, and posted a personal essay on my company's website titled, "The Family Failure Who Built an Empire." I told everything. The pain, the rejection, the silent nights spent wondering if I'd ever be enough, and the blazing path I carved out of their doubt and disdain. I didn't name names, but every word was a hammer, breaking down the walls of shame they'd built around me. Within days, the essay went viral. Strangers from all walks of life reached out, sharing their own stories of family rejection and triumph. Messages poured in from daughters and sons, black sheep and misunderstood artists, each one telling me, "This was me too." My studio exploded with new clients, my phone ringing with opportunities I had never dared to dream of. A top podcast invited me to share my story with the world, and publishers came knocking with book deals. The very validation my family never gave me, now flooding in from people who truly saw me. But the greatest victory wasn't the money or the fame. It was the chance to give back. I created Whitmore Rising, a grant for young artists cast aside by their families, a lifeline for those who, like me, had been told they weren't enough. It was my way of saying, you are seen, you are valued, you are not alone. Months later, after the blog had rippled through my life like a tidal wave, I received an email from Dad. His message was simple but heavy, a request to talk, a tentative olive branch across the chasm we'd built. I stared at the screen long and hard, fingers hovering over the keyboard, before I finally typed one line that held everything I'd become. I forgive you, but I don't need you. And with that, I closed the door on my past, stepping fully into a future built on my terms. Revenge was never about making them regret their words or actions. It was about becoming untouchable, unshakably proud, and unforgettable. To anyone reading this, dismissed, disowned, underestimated, know this: you are not a failure. You are a force. Let their silence be your spark, your fuel, and your power. Let your story be louder than their judgments, because in the end, the most powerful revenge is the life you live beyond their reach.